You've written and spoken of Israel's, quote, murderous repression of the Palestinian people. I think you mean since the creation of Greater Israel in '67, and probably
I would agree 48.
All right, okay.
And actually before 48.
And ongoing to today, you can say. Okay, so my question is this. Murderous repression of the Palestinian people. What really, Norman, explains this behavior?
Oh, I think what explains it is perfectly obvious. It's the only way you can achieve the goal that they set for themselves. You want to create a overwhelmingly Jewish state in an area which is overwhelmingly not Jewish. And there's no way you can achieve that goal except by, since in the 20th century extermination is not an option, the American style, then the only option is to expel them. And it's very difficult, just like it's very difficult to uproot a tree that's been in the ground for 100 years. You have to dig very deep to get those roots out, to extirpate it. It's very difficult to uproot an entire indigenous population. And you know, if you read the historians like Benny Morris, he's a thug morally, but you know, as a historian, he's reasonably accurate. And he says, you know, in his last major revision, the book of the Palestinian refugees, it's called the Palestinian Refugee Question Revisited, he says transfer was inbuilt in Zionism. And it's hard to transfer an indigenous population without being really brutal.
You make me recall that very famous quote by General Moshe Dayan, Israel's one-eyed warlord. I think he was the first one to say, look, it's very simple. It's, quote, them or us. That is, in essence, the Zionist strategy.
I think once they defined their goal as wanting to create a Jewish state, and by a Jewish state, they meant a state in which a maximum non-Jewish minority would be about 15%. That's what they had in mind. Well, how else do you do it? I mean, I don't think there were many options. They're now trying a slightly different strategy in the occupied territories, which is the apartheid strategy. Namely, keep as much as you can of the land, put the indigenous population in these Bantustans, and try to do it that way.
But Norman, it's worse than that. I'm sorry to interrupt. I think it's worse than that. I think the whole drive is to make life hell, to create conditions, in the hope that the Palestinians will simply pack up and leave.
I totally agree with that, and that's exactly what I was going to say.
But the question then becomes, what if they don't pack up and leave?
I totally agree.
You see, I can see a nightmare scenario in which there is a Zionist Holocaust. They create the conditions to drive them off.
I think, you know, the reason I don't agree with you there is because you have to remember the whole world operates within certain, I know people are kind of skeptical about it, but there are moral constraints.
But are you about to tell me Zionism operates within these moral constraints?
Oh yeah, very seriously. You know, and they've been testing the waters.
Even Zionism has to say to itself, how much can we get away with?
Yeah, not even, especially because they're totally dependent on the U.S. They can't do anything without the U.S. giving a green light.
One of the Israelis I most admire and respect is Major General Shlomo Gazit. I think he was the best intelligence, military intelligence director they have. I once said to him, in a private conversation, but I've quoted in my book since then, I once said to him, Shlomo, I've come to the conclusion that it's all a myth. Israel's existence has never, ever been in any danger from any combination. And with a sad smile, he said to me, Alan, the trouble with us Israelis is that we have become the victims of our own propaganda. Now, Norman, does that explain why most Israelis simply cannot admit that a wrong was done to the Palestinians? Is it as simple as that?
No, because you have to bear in mind, most countries admit the crimes they've committed against the indigenous population long after it has any political repercussions. What difference does it make now for Americans to acknowledge what we did to the native population?
Fair point.
There's no native population to extract any political benefit from that acknowledgement. In the case of Israel, there is a problem that lingers. It's that refugee problem. And to make the acknowledgement of a wrong committed, it has real repercussions, because people say, well, if you acknowledge the wrong, there's still opportunity to right the wrong, and they can't do it yet. In 100 years, they'll be dancing with wolves.
But they can't do it yet. But isn't the reality that there is not the remotest chance of peace until Israel and Israelis can say to the Arabs, we admit we wronged the Palestinians?
I do agree with that.
Well, let's come now to the question, the really big question. Why are most Jews of the world silent on the matter of Zionism's crimes? Is it in large part simply the fact that most Jews don't know because of the mainstream media and publishing complicity in the suppression of the truth of history?
My impression is the largest factor, and here it's, again, I have to emphasize speculation, is that Jews have enjoyed, especially since World War II, remarkable secular success. They are by far and away the most successful economic group in the United States, long outdistancing.
And throughout the Western world.
And throughout the Western world. And that kind of success inevitably has nothing peculiar to Jews. It goes to your head, and you begin to think you're better. And then when you begin to think you're better, you also think that all the criticism that's being directed against you is not because you have done some wrong, but because of envy, that Nietzschean ressentiment. They resent the success of the Jews. And so when Jews attribute all the criticism to anti-Semitism, I think a lot of them really believe it. That they think that people are jealous of us, envious of us, and that's why they're criticizing us, because otherwise we're very impressive.
I follow exactly what you're saying, but is that another way of saying it isn't simply, as I put it to you, that many Jews don't know? There's a case of don't want to know. Now let me tell you, I'll give you an example. After my dear wife, to whom I've been married for 45 years, my second best, longest friend in the world is my Jewish accountant. He's very kosher, but he's no kind of zealot. I once took him to meet Golda Meir to say thank you to him, and he was, that's the greatest moment of his life. He loathes what Israel has become, but he won't read my book. He doesn't want to know the truth.
Well, I'm not sure if they think it is the truth. I think that many Jews believe that there has to be some double standard or sinister motive, because they do believe that, well, we've had so many Nobel laureates, and we've had so many this and so many that we really are better, and it must be envy and jealousy, or some sort of intrinsic, animus towards us. I think it's not much like the attitude, different than the attitude of Americans towards the rest of the world. Everywhere, when the criticism is directed against Americans, what do most Americans think? They're just jealous of us.
It is a most appalling self-righteousness.
Yeah, well, Americans are appallingly self-righteous. You call them the dimmest bulbs in the world. They also are very self-righteous.
Yeah. All right, then.
That's what success does to